So we're ready to go. Good morning, everybody. I understand we have close to 140 people signed up this morning, which is extraordinary. Welcome to the Hunt and Hunt webinar on China, a challenge and an opportunity. The issue of China is front of mind in this country at the moment. And we should remember a few anniversaries. We're coming up to the 5th anniversary of the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. And people may have forgotten, but Tony Abbott saw that as one of the highlights of his term as Prime Minister. And also next year will be the 50th anniversary of the decision by Gough Whitlam to recognise China. We closely followed the United States. The world has changed greatly in the last 50 years. We went through a period of globalising the world economy, but then in recent years we've had national interests starting to push through, and we've seen tariffs reimposed in China, between China and Australia, and we've also seen the United States seeking to impose tariffs under the Biden administration. The issues that we're talking about today, which is really business-to-business issues, are terribly important for both China and Australia. The business-to-business links underpin a large part of the Australian economy, and in particular the New South Wales economy, but they also underpin the Chinese economy. To some extent, China is perhaps a victim of its own success economically. China has managed to develop a middle class since we first recognised China. High-earning consumers who are interested in buying foreign goods and produce. And of course, we have the situation today where President Xi Jinping has a China dream to grow his country. So also Donald Trump wanted to make America great again. But really, one of the key drivers is going to be the business-to-business links. And that is the key focus of this seminar this morning. The recent couple of years have certainly seen a lot of challenges in those areas of business-to-business. There's been major adverse impacts on particularly our university sector in Australia because of COVID. And probably the combination of COVID and the other diplomatic challenges with China is a diabolical combination at the moment. But China also does need to continue to buy from Australia. We supply an awful lot of steel, iron ore, natural gas, and we supply a lot of highly educated young people who've done their university time in Australia. One of the key issues with those links is that not only do they strengthen the possibility of business-to-business relationships, but they also strengthen the people-to-people relationships. There will be a number of young Chinese who've been educated in Australia who are going to move through the system in China, and they will be the leaders in China over the coming decades. And most of them, one would hope, will fondly remember their time studying in Australia. New South Wales also has a very special relationship with China. Many years ago, Premier Neville Wran signed the New South Wales, the sister state agreement with Guangdong province. And on the Chinese side, it was signed by the father of the current president. That two-way relationship between New South Wales and Guangdong province has remained very strong, and I'll leave Murray and Carla and others to talk about that later on during this session. But that relationship has managed to stay in place and is still a very warm relationship. And I've been privileged to have something to do with that over the years, and there is no doubt there's tremendous goodwill. And that, of course, is soft diplomacy, and that helps our broader connections with China to keep functioning. So enough from me. I'm now going to ask Murray to speak. Murray Davis was one of the great acquisitions by New South Wales when he became our commissioner in China, originally for South China, Hong Kong and Macau, and now for the whole of China and Taiwan. Murray has got a long career in both trade and diplomacy. I envy him. He's a fluent speaker of Mandarin. And I've had plenty of opportunities to observe the terrific work that Murray does in China. So Murray, over to you.
Thank you, Jim, for that introduction. Just checking that, can somebody just signal that you can hear me?
It's all good.
All good? All right, thank you. So, Jim's asked me to speak to you all for about 20 minutes, so I'm going to whip through some material here, hopefully you will find interesting. For those of you who are watching China in the news, I think you'll agree that there's a number of puzzling things that you see and that are reported. So as Jim indicated, we really don't want to use this session to talk about what's happening in the bilateral relationship, but suffice to say, there's definitely some tensions and some issues there at the national government level. You may have seen news that the Chinese economy is slowing, which it appears that it is. You may have seen some very strange words, phrases coming out of the Chinese government rhetoric that are hard to perhaps interpret in an Australian context. So words like the dual circulation economy and the co-prosperity zones and socialism with Chinese characteristics for the new era. These sorts of things have been coming out, and I think it's puzzled some people as to what exactly they mean, and people spend the books being written about what they do mean. Some of the policy changes that have been implemented by the Chinese government in the recent times have attracted a lot of news in the West. So the ban on home tutoring that was instituted a few weeks ago, some disruptions to Chinese companies trying to list offshore, radical changes to data security laws in China, major restructuring of the real estate industry, including new land taxes and all sorts of lending caps from the banks in an attempt to control house prices to improve housing affordability. Sometimes I look at these things and I wish they'd do something like that in Sydney, but you know, they're doing what they can to manage this in China, and the impacts have been quite profound. There are some major changes coming to the regulations governing food importation, which I'll talk about a little bit more detail. You may have seen news of the bans on online computer games. Now, these things made quite sensational news in Australia, and as I said, it probably gives you a puzzling or a slightly confusing impression of what is happening in China. So what I'd like to focus on today, rather than those things, is just my main point, really, that China remains incredibly important to New South Wales. And if we can flick to the next slide, I'll show you why that is and exactly what that looks like in practice. And again, please. Okay, so my bar chart here on the left shows with New South Wales, what I've done here, this is in preparation for this talk. I'm guessing that we don't have many coal exporters or copper miners on the line. So what I've done is I've stripped out all those commodities and just left agribusiness and processed food. And when you compare those exports to China with other countries, you can see down the bottom there that China is by a very significant margin our largest export destination for products of that nature. So I'm talking agribusiness, horticulture, meat, dairy, wine, processed food, and health supplements. It's a very, very large market, well over $3 billion. And it's dropped back a little bit in the last 12 months, but it's still held up quite well. And you can see that the other markets there, the United States, New Zealand, are significant, but less than China. And then the other ones that you typically think of as our big markets like Japan and the UK are way behind. And those proportions continue. Even though China's trade imports from Australia may have reduced a little bit during COVID and other things, and particular industries have been affected by sanctions and tariffs and so forth. Even so, those proportions still pertain. When you look at the chart on the right, you can see what it actually is. What are the products that I have included in there? And you can see that it's processed food, it's health supplements, food and live animals, which basically means other categories of food not elsewhere specified, and a little bit of stuff there on medical devices. But basically, what we sell to China is processed food, beverages, health supplements, and products of that nature. So I'd like to talk you through now some characteristics of the market, that if you're in that sort of space, if you're exporting or producing those products, what's happening on the buy side in China. So if I can have the next slide, please. Oh, all right. Well, I don't want to dwell on this slide, but I would just point out to you that we often hear in Western media, talk of the rising middle classes in China and the growing consumer power and so forth. This is something that I just wanted to put a little bit of context around now. I think Jim will make the slides available to you later. You can study this in your spare time if you would like to, but the headline from this slide, which is a histogram of frequency distributions of incomes, is that there's only about 5% of the 1.4 billion people in China, about 5% of them have got incomes above 25,000 Australian dollars a year. So we're not really looking here at a 1.4 billion person market. We're looking at more like a 70 million person market. Still a big market, but it's not 1.7 billion people that are going to be buying, expensive product from Australia. It's more like 70 million. So if we can just have the next slide, please. And one more. Okay. So what we're seeing here, and this is people who are exporting into this market have to be extremely well attuned to who's actually buying it, because it's not a homogenous market at all. So the people who know about this, the marketing experts have classified Chinese consumers into three categories: the so-called early adopters, the child-focused or the children-focused consumers, and then the people who are purchasing on behalf of a multi-generational family. And I'll talk about those one by one in a moment. But basically what we're looking at is three characteristics that will determine your success in this market. One is how popular you are. Are you popular in Australia? Do you become popular in China? And so if other people are buying things, the group, people do follow other consumers, and it's a really important trend. Quality is of exceptional importance to Chinese buyers, and there's an increasing focus on health. So if it's got health benefits, that's a good thing. But if we can just take to the next slide, and I'll just talk you through very quickly what these three categories of buyers actually look like. Okay, so there is this group of people in the demography, which is the 19 to 30 age bracket, single, relatively high levels of income. So this is in that sort of over 25,000 Australian dollar a year kind of gross net worth. Busy, don't really care about price, very fashion conscious, eat out a lot, like spending money. It's a form of conspicuous consumption. They don't want to spend a lot of time preparing food, and so they're interested in these frozen foods and leisure foods and all sorts of fashionable drinks, and willing to experiment with things. Some of these innovative product, plant-based meats, plant-based dairy, non-dairy coffee additives and things like this. But that's one group that people are attempting to target as a market. We can go to the next slide, Isabel. There's this other group which we described as the child-focused group. So this is usually the mother who's looking after the husband and one child, or increasingly two children. And if the Chinese government's encouragements work, it'll be 3 children. And so they're in a different age demographic. They're a slightly older group, that sort of 30 to 45 group. Could be male or female, but predominantly female. Their parents, they're busy with work. They're more likely to cook at home than those young people who eat out. Lots of family gatherings, lots of stuff that's done especially for the children, and an overriding interest in health and safety, quality of the product. And they're looking for a whole range of, snacks and infant foods. They love dairy. Dairy is extremely important to them, and it's in relatively short supply from domestic providers, and the grains. So that's the second demographic there. So then there's a third one. If Isabel, if you could move to the next slide, please. All right, so this is what they call a multi-generational family. So again, an older demographic. It's got old people in there who've got probably different health needs. So there's increasing levels of obesity, of diabetes, of arthritis, heart conditions, even dementia. So there's all sorts of, I guess, health needs of that older generation, and the people that are buying the food and preparing the food are very sensitive to that. So they're looking for a different kind of product, perhaps, than someone who's just looking for younger children. But again, the lifestyle habits are listed out there. They tend to buy larger quantities. They maybe do shopping once a week. They still cook at home. They're buying much more product because they're buying stuff for different age groups. And then some of the interests there, that these are the ones that probably are going to be particularly interested in the health supplements. Chinese are avid consumers of all sorts of pills and potions and oils and supplements that they believe will be beneficial for their health. So when you are attacking the China market or targeting the China market, it's really important the marketing people will tell you that which demographic you're important. It could be multiple ones, but you really need to think quite clearly about who you're focusing and who you're targeting, and working up a narrative as to how your product meets the needs of that demographic. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. And again, what you're finding at the moment is that there are a number of trends with imported food in China, particularly towards smaller packaging. And this is, for those younger demographics, I suppose. Increasing interest in instant food, stuff that is very easy to prepare. Most people are bearing shocking mortgage loads in China, and many of them are holding down 2 jobs. And, with the obligations of family and mortgages and so forth, a lot of them just don't have time to go out and shop and prepare food and cook it. So there's this instant consumption sort of culture is really, really common. But as the health profile of the population moves away from people being affected by infectious disease to people being affected by chronic and lifestyle diseases, there is a growing concern and obsession, if you like, with health. So the functional food groups, the low fat, low sugar, healthy, low cholesterol sort of stuff is a really, really big deal. So I won't dwell on this, but as I said, you can look at these slides at your leisure, and hopefully give you some ideas of what are some of the emerging product trends for imported food products in China. So I'm conscious of time, so let me, if I can keep moving, please, Isabel. All right, so this is one of the challenges. So this is a horrible slide. I really struggled as to how to present it. So let me try to explain it this way. You can see there in the red, it says overseas facilities registration, regulation and process by steps based on decree 248, 249. Now, those decrees 248 and 249 were 2 documents that were issued by the Guangdong General Customs Administration, China General Customs Administration in April of this year. And at first, nobody really took them very seriously, but when we all started looking at them, we could see that they actually have profound ramifications for anybody exporting food to China. This is not something aimed at Australia. This is something that China has imposed to take effect from the 1st of January next year. And it's going to mean 2 things. All people who manufacture food, all people all over the world must be registered with the Chinese government. Now, at the moment, if you're in the Australian food industry and you produce meat or dairy or seafood, you will be familiar with this. And this is something where there's a lot of this been, I guess, reported in the news that the Chinese government accreditation for different meatworks or different seafood providers has been revoked for different reasons over the years. And it means that product produced in those factories can no longer be exported to China. And it's had serious impact on the beef industry and the seafood industry. Currently, there are 4 categories of product that have got that sort of system in place. So there's the meat, the dairy, the seafood. And the fourth one, we've got bird's nest, which is not something that we really do in Australia, but other countries do. That all of the producers of those countries all over the world have to be registered with the Chinese government. Now, from the 1st of January, there are going to be another, basically all food is going to have to be registered with the Chinese government. Now that, I'm pointing this, I'm imagining you can see it, but you can't. There are 14 categories of product which are listed there in that almost unreadable mishmash of stuff. That was produced by Chinese customs to try to be helpful, saying that if you are producing products in these things, so thyme leaves, pecan, almonds, soybean powder, rice flour, dried shelled walnuts, etc., you have to be registered with the Chinese government, and that has to come through what's called an Australian competent authority. So at the moment, that's the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Water, and there's this flurry of activity going on at the doors in Canberra, trying to establish how they can effectively certify you, producers, as being qualified to meet Chinese quality requirements. Now, if you're not in the 4 that have already been registered, and you're not in the 14, all other foods also have to be registered, but there's a different process which we haven't actually seen announced yet. So there's an enormous amount of anxiety in the food exporting industry globally as to how people are going to comply with these things, because not only do you need to be registered, but you need to have your Chinese registration numbers printed on the packaging of the product. So it may be that in the next few months, there are some additional disruptions to the export of food products from Australia if companies are not able to comply with this system. And the obstacles are quite high because there's so much unknown, there's a lot of uncertainty about it. There is one way out of it is just to really, really work hard to make sure that you do comply. If people haven't heard of this and would like to know more, you can contact us separately and we'll be happy to tell you what we know about it. But the alternative is to look at cross-border e-commerce. And if I could move to the next slide, I'd like to just talk about cross-border e-commerce for a few minutes. I've still got a few minutes left. So cross-border e-commerce for China is a very, very rapidly growing business. It's only been going for about 7 or 8 years, or maybe even less, maybe 7 years. Currently, they import $120 billion of goods. That's not just food. That's goods globally. Well, all over the world, they import $120 billion, and 35% of that's food. So by my rough calculations, I reckon that's about 120 billion Australian dollars worth of food that's imported globally. Now, exactly what Australia's proportion of that is, I haven't seen figures, but I know that there are many vendors in Australia, producers in Australia that are selling stuff. So what this means is that people buy it online and you ship it to them. And it doesn't go through the general trade things, and it would not be subject to those decrees that I just talked about, the 248, 249 decrees. However, while it's very attractive and it's fairly low cost to start, I do need to make some caveats here. And one is that in the first couple of years, very few brands make very much money. I also think you need to be aware that in China, generally, the fact that you're a foreign product is having a diminishing advantage. The Chinese producers are getting much better very quickly. And outside of a couple of sectors like dairy, where there simply is not enough to produce, meet local demand, other sectors, the local product's getting pretty good and the marketing is pretty smart. And they've got a lot of marketing money behind them. So the advantage of being a foreign product is not quite what it was. And that if companies are really wanting to push through these cross-border e-commerce sales channels, you do need a lot of budget to do marketing with. There's the whole story that I'm happy to talk people through one-on-one if you'd like to approach me about the cross-border e-commerce marketing, the key opinion leaders, the live streaming, the social media networks, the social commerce networks. It's an amazing story. If you want to have a try, as I said, we'd be really happy to talk you through some suggestions on how to do it. I am getting towards the end of my allotted time, so if I can just go through one or two more slides, Isabel, that would be great. So you've got basically there's two ways that you can get product in. One is through the general trade thing, and that's the blue the blue arrows at the top, you know, you make your stuff, you set your brand, you put it in a container, you ship it across, you've got an importer, you've got distributors, and it ships into the retailers and the consumers buy it. That's your standard traditional general trade pathway. And that's still the bulk of all the stuff that comes into China. It comes through that. The cross-border e-commerce thing, as I said, is growing rapidly, but still relatively minor part of the whole importation supply chain. There's two ways that it works. One is the bonded warehouse mode. So you put your product on consignment into a bonded warehouse, either in Australia or in Hong Kong, or more likely somewhere in mainland China. People go online and buy it, and then you've got a whole network of people that pick the product up from the bonded warehouse, clear it through customs, put it on a guy with a motorbike who drives it to the consumer, and that's how that works. There is another way which is also popular, which is the direct shipping mode. So people go online and buy something, and you ship it to them directly by Australia Post or by another courier service. It's not quite as industrial in scale as the other thing, and it makes it very expensive for the consumer, because you will normally pass the freight costs on them. But it is nonetheless a common pathway. Jim, I reckon I've talked for exactly 20 minutes, and I think that's my last slide. Isabel, are you able to just check whether that's, I've got one more. Oh, okay. Well, I won't go into this in any detail, but what this is an attempt to do is to just articulate for people the complexity of the supply chain around cross-border e-commerce. So I might leave this with you, and you can have a look, but it's just trying to show the steps that things go through, and the kinds of companies that you would come across and that you'd have to have relationships with. So with that, Jim, I'll thank everybody for their time. I hope this has been useful, and I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Murray. There's so many issues, and you're so experienced, you could speak for 3 days and we'd still be learning stuff at the end. So very much appreciate your presentation. Now I'd like to introduce Carla Lampy, who's the Director, Global Markets for Investment New South Wales. Carla, like Murray, has got a background in terms of international trade, and we're very fortunate to have her and her team in New South Wales. New South Wales has put a lot of effort into its global reach over the last little while, and China has remained a key focus. So over to you, Carla.
Thanks so much, Jim. And a big thank you to Hunt and Hunt for putting together this important webinar today. In my remarks, I want to briefly touch on the New South Wales relationship with China and some of the key upcoming highlights that we have. And then a bit about Investment New South Wales, which is the agency that both myself and Murray are coming to you from today. And then talk to you about the support that's available to assist you to access the China market, but also to assist you to access markets more broadly. And I'm sure you'll agree that after hearing about all the opportunities that Murray's outlined, if you're interested, and if that doesn't interest you, I don't know what will. And there's certainly a range of resources and programs available from the government to help you access the market. So just a little bit about the relationship, and Jim touched on it earlier. Of course, our relationship with China is underpinned by very strong and active sister state relationships with Guangdong, and then we have several friendship agreements, including with Beijing and the Shanghai municipalities. But really, one of the real jewels in the crown is the biennial joint economic meeting, which is a really key feature of the New South Wales-Guangdong sister state relationship. In 2019, New South Wales was the host of the 27th JEM here in Sydney. And this was a really significant milestone meeting for us. And it celebrated our people-to-people links, which really form the basis of the business-to-business links, and generated really important economic outcomes for many of the participants that were participating in the GEM. Next month, we're coming together for the 28th time for the joint economic meeting, which with our sister state Guangdong. to celebrate that long-term bond that we share. This time it will be hosted by our friends in Guangdong, and look, we're really, we're very excited about that meeting and celebrating that relationship again. I mentioned that today I'm talking to you from Investment New South Wales, and Investment New South Wales is a newly created agency that's been brought together to bring the government's economic development, trade promotion and investment attraction activities all into the one place, with a single point of accountability for trade, industry, investment, and also the private sector. And our mission at the agency is to generate economic value for New South Wales and create sustainable jobs in high priority industries. And one of the things that we're really passionate about at this agency is about taking the best of New South Wales, the best of our products, our services, our peoples, our capabilities, and really showing them to the world, and then bringing the best of the world into New South Wales. And I feel that there's a really strong alignment between our mandate at Investment New South Wales and many of the priorities of many of those in the audience today. We know that Australia is one of the world's best performing economies, and within Australia, New South Wales is the largest and the most diverse of the state economies. And in fact, some would say the economic powerhouse of the country. And we know that trade plays a really significant role in our economy. It supports 1 in 5 jobs in Australia, and we know that businesses who export are more resilient, more innovative, and pay higher wages. At the current time, exports represent about 15% of our state economy. And so promoting our competitive advantage, promoting our products, our services to China and other markets is critical for our future growth. And that's why we recently launched the first ever trade statement for New South Wales, which was New South Wales's vision for a blueprint to double our export growth over the next decade. One of the first milestones in the statement that we have outlined to reach is $130 billion in exports by 2024. The current value of our exports is about 95.7 billion. So we've got a bit of a gap that we've got to close. And through the New South Wales trade statement, we've got about 30 initiatives that we are going to work on to double our exports over the next 10 years to 200 billion, I beg your pardon, by 2031. We know that supporting exports is crucial to our recovery and also to our future growth. We know that over 97% of businesses are SMEs, yet only 3% of those export. And I talked to you just before about the value of exporting in terms of higher wages and stronger innovation. So what I wanted to talk to you about is the programs and the resources, as well as the teams, both domestically in New South Wales, both in Sydney and across the regions, as well as globally, that we've put in place to address some of the gaps and provide businesses with both the knowledge and the capability to export. So firstly, to our international network, which we are growing to really amplify the support that we can provide businesses. We are partway through rolling out a bolstering of our international network. And when completed, will mean we'll have up to 55 staff in 21 locations. That will be a mix of hub offices, including in Shanghai, as well as other key markets across the globe, supported by spoke offices that will largely be New South Wales representatives embedded within Austrade. Of course, you heard just before from Murray, and Murray has been joined by other New South Wales colleagues that will be our senior representatives across the globe, including Michael Newman, who will be our Senior Trade and Investment, or who is our Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner for North Asia. Stephen Cartwright was recently announced as our Agent General to the United Kingdom. We've got new staff going into offices in London, Mumbai, Tokyo, and recruitment is also underway for positions around the globe. And of course, our footprint in China is the state's largest of our international offices of our international network, I beg your pardon, with offices in both Shanghai and Guangzhou that Murray leads. We've got a range of support available for businesses where you are looking to identify new markets and access new customers. This ranges from advisory services to supporting businesses with international opportunities. And we really work with companies across the spectrum. So those who are not yet export ready through to those who are already exporting and want to expand the markets that they're exporting to. We work really closely with our federal government colleagues at Austrade to deliver the New South Wales Trade Start Network. And this is a team of experienced export advisors who are based across the state. And these are really advisors that have been there and done that. They've already exported, they've done that in their past businesses. And so they're here to help provide tailored advice, market planning information and training to help companies to access those markets. And they can also help connect you with our international colleagues, such as Murray. Just last year, we helped over 800 businesses receive tailored support throughout regional New South Wales as well as in Sydney. And we're always looking for new businesses to help with our region of export advisors. So please do get in touch if you think that if exporting is something you're looking to do. For those businesses that are looking to export for the first time, we also have the Export Capability Program, which delivers workshops to increase export readiness and develop skills. And over the past couple of years, we've had about 5,000 participants through these programs. And again, we're always looking to reach new businesses to assist. And then for those a bit further along the path and those that are already ready to export, but looking for those new markets, we've got the Going Global Export Program. This was a program announced last year, and we've been really delighted by the success of this. The program provides free export coaching, tailored workshops, international networking, and business-to-business matching companies over a sustained period of time for about 3 to 6 months, helping businesses wanting to look at new markets. Last year, when we ran the program for the first year, over 150 businesses completed the program. And that included 30 businesses gaining assistance to export to China, which Murray and his team worked so closely with. There was another 120 businesses looking to export to other markets. And, you know, some of the successes that we had for the program into the China market included sales, distribution agreements, signing of MOUs, as well as non-disclosure agreements. One of our health and medical companies attributed their success at the China Medical Equipment Fair to their participation in the program. So we've done year 1 of the Going Global program, and we're now looking to help 200 new businesses on the program this year. For China, our programs are a food, beverage and consumer health program, which culminates in Sial in April next year. And then for those businesses with a health and medical technology capability, we're running a Going Global program, which will culminate in the China Medical Equipment Fair in May of 2022. Applications for that program, for the Health and MedTech program, are open until Wednesday, the 17th of November. So we'll pop in the chat the email address to register your expression of interest. And look, applications have closed for the food and beverage and consumer health stream. However, if you have listened to what Murray said, if you're interested in the program, please do get in touch. Again, we'll share an email address in the chat if you would like to register your interest, despite the fact that the applications are closed. And then the final piece of assistance that I just wanted to share with you is the New South Wales Export Assistance Grants, which are where eligible businesses can receive 50% of reimbursements for costs of up to $10,000 of costs incurred in export-related expenses, and for expenses backdated to the 1st of January. So it's a grant that's designed to help businesses recover some of the costs associated with maintaining, re-entering and finding new export markets. If you're familiar with the federal government's EMDG grants, you will have a good picture of what the New South Wales Export Assistance Grants can support with. So look, in summary, we're here to help business identify new markets and access new customers. If you're a business that's thinking about exporting to China, but you're not sure if you're ready, you might be interested in the Export Capability Program. If you're a business that is ready to export, please come and talk to one of our export advisors. They're based in Orange, Wagga Wagga, Tamworth, Nowra, Port Macquarie, Ourimbah, as well as in Greater Sydney. We've popped their email address into the chat, and we can refer you to the most appropriate advisor after this session. And then again, if you're a bit further down the path and you've already been incurring money exporting, you might be interested in our New South Wales Export Assistance Grant. And finally, if you represent a business in the food, beverage and consumer markets and or in the health and medtech industry, and you know that China is the market that you are really keen for, then please sign up for our Going Global programs to China. So I guess in final summary, we're here to help at Investment New South Wales. We're always looking to work with new businesses and to help you access either new markets and new customers. So please do get in touch. And thanks very much for your time today. And back over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much, Carla. The work that's been done in developing New South Wales international government network over the last 10 years has really been quite extraordinary. Back in the 1980s, or in the 1990s in particular, New South Wales didn't have any overseas representation. And it was Premier Nathan Rees who decided to establish overseas bases. And the interesting thing is that that policy has been a bipartisan policy, started with a Labor Premier and supported from the other side of politics. So the drive to increase exports from New South Wales at a government level is really a bipartisan concept. Thank you again, Carla. I'd now like to introduce Alison Airy, the Chief Executive Officer of the Australia-China Business Council in New South Wales. The Australia-China Business Council has a very long association with Hunt and Hunt. My former partner, Bill O'Shea in Melbourne, wrote the first constitution, national constitution for the association, and the baton was passed that in Sydney, the current constitution was written by Hunt and Hunt in New South Wales. We've been long-term members and will continue to be. So over to you, Alison, to talk a bit about ACBC.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. And thank you for all the advocacy that you've done on the Australia-China relationship over such a long period of time. Thank you also to our government speakers for your presentations today, and also for the wonderful work that you do in supporting businesses in the China market, just generally. So if we could move to the first slide. Jim's given you a bit of an overview, but we've been around since 1973. We're a member-based organisation, and we exist solely to support business links between Australia and China. Next slide, please. So how can we help you? Well, if you are considering a China journey, our network has really, really deep expertise on China. And I'm not talking about just the Secretariat staff and our executive, but also our members. Our members are exporters. They're people who've been advising companies for many years on doing business with China. They are Chinese Australians. So for what is a complicated market, our membership do have a lot of people who can help you with that journey. The second thing you can get out of ACBC is the insights that we provide. So it's obviously a very rapidly changing market. We bring insights through webinars, through events to keep you up with the latest on what's happening in the market. It's also an opportunity for businesses, exporters to really position their products in this market. So it's quite a useful thing to do to generate a strong following within the Australia market, have runs on the board before you make your journey into the China market specifically. So that's something that you can do via our network, is really position yourself and build that consumer base, build a community of supporters who will really be a basis for your success in China, because for products to succeed in China, they really do need to have a track record of success in their own market. The third way ACBC can help is just the general advocacy that we do with the government on the Australia-China business relationship, where I think one of the few organisations at the moment who are really getting up there and saying, look, this relationship is really important. We know it's a very complex relationship, but we really need to nurture this relationship and cherish the Australia-China business relationship. So by becoming a member, you also support that side of our work. And if you could move to the next slide, I put this up as an indication of the fact that we also have fun. So we have a lot of social events. Our network really enjoys networking. They're very generous with sharing their expertise and their connections and their time. So that's also the way we operate. I'll just say a few things about what I've seen in the environment. I have a lot of contact with businesses all the time. While it has been a difficult time with the pandemic and of course the deterioration in the bilateral relationship, I've been quite surprised at how much interest remains in the market. Now, of course, some businesses who've been directly affected by trade restrictions are having a difficult time. I'm talking about wine and barley and those areas. But in non-affected areas, there continues to be a strong appetite for finding new opportunities in this market. And businesses on both sides recognise there's a lot of mutual benefit in Australia-China trade. So at the business level, we're still very popular with each other. And one thing that I had been concerned about with all the negative media about the Australia-China relationship was that consumer sentiment towards Australia might be damaged. But that's not what I'm hearing at all. And I see Murray nodding away, which is great from the on-the-ground perspective. I'm seeing companies all the time who are interested in launching products into China. As just one example, I was contacted recently by a restaurant group. Restaurants are not a very good business at the moment. They've decided to launch a product range, a consumer product range into the China market, and they've come to ACBC to learn about consumer product marketing and to engage with our members. So that's just one example. I think the number of New South Wales companies participating in the China International Import Expo is quite strong. 38 companies are heading over to CIIE from New South Wales. So I think that's another real vote of confidence in the market from producers here. So I might leave it there. I think Jim would want me to, so that we can save a bit of time for any questions there might be from the floor. But I would just say that we've got some great events coming up at ACBC. The first is an Innovation and Technology Conference on the 18th of November, which the New South Wales government is also supporting. That's a live event, which will also be live streamed. So if innovation and tech is your thing, please come along to that. And we also have our first social networking event on the 7th of December, which will just be a chance to get together and network, our first since Chinese New Year dinner last February. So I might leave it there and hand back to Jim.
Thank you very much, Alison. That was a good summary, and I do encourage those who are on this webinar who are not members of ACBC to get in touch with Alison and understand the value of being part of that network. I've certainly seen in a very long time that I've been a member and active participant, there's been some terrific business links created between members as a result of being part of the organisation. I'm going to give a quick wrap up on a few things which have emerged from talking to clients and clients who are raising issues with me. We at Hunt & Hunt have been advising people doing business in China for a very long time. And the current environment creates its own special challenges. It's very important, and Murray actually touched on one of those elements earlier in his talk. The regulations relating to imported goods into China need to be understood and observed very carefully. The issue of labelling has been a common issue which we've had to advise clients on here at Hunt & Hunt. And I think Patrick Hutchinson from the Australian Meat Industry Council's online. The beef industry's also had issues with labelling. Now, some of these issues can be the result of officious public servants in China. On the other hand, it's very important to know the requirements that regulate the products or goods that you are sending to China. We've seen examples in recent times of the question marks over barley shipments. We've had with bugs in them. And China is very focused on safety of food products, particularly. China's had some disastrous experiences with adulterated food from time to time. And it's a big public interest issue in China and not just an issue for the bureaucrats. I think it's very important that people do review their contracts. I think it's also very important to keep in touch with your distributors in China. Now, most of the time over the last several decades, people would do that in regular trips to China. But I think it's really important to get an understanding from your distributors as to how they're going and how their market is. COVID has been disruptive in China. COVID issues have impacted, for instance, on the logistics chain in China. And we've seen shipments of lobsters which were so delayed in release from customs in China that they had to be disposed of. But one of the problems is that with strict quarantine regulations in China, there's actually been significant staffing issues in some areas that are responsible for processing goods arriving on shore and through the customs process in China. So we need to be aware of those things. The issue of quality and compliance with specifications has always been a key issue with China. The wool industry many years ago in the mid-1990s worked very hard to encourage China to adopt international standards in relation to wool, and that was standard specifications which were recognised by the International Wool Testing Organisation. And once China got on board with that, where there was a common understanding on what wool was compliant and what was not compliant with international standards, we managed to see the level of disputation in relation to wool shipments arriving in China drop from, at one stage, some 800,000 bales of Australian wool stuck in Suzhou over quality disputes to almost nothing. That was helped too, of course, by modernising the contracts for the export of wool to China and the creation of the model wool contract. Now, we've got a lot of exporters in Australia who are exporting their products, be they oranges, almonds, olives, all sorts of things. I mean, one of the successes in recent years was that from New South Wales was the negotiation of the first contract to sell cherries from mainland Australia to China. And in fact, they were introduced into the China market by former Trade Minister Niall Blair in Shanghai and Guangzhou several years ago. But I cannot overemphasise the need to ensure strict compliance. Because of the current environment, there can be cases where a Chinese official in a remote city has heard all the negative stuff about Australia and feels that they've got to be pretty rigorous in checking our stuff as it goes into their market. And in days past, if you stuffed up labelling some goods or you had minor quality defects, you might get a yellow card. But the consequence now is that your import permit could be in real jeopardy. So, as I say again, I cannot overemphasise the importance of making sure that you really are compliant in all respects with the goods that you're sending into China, and then you should have no problems. In terms of the future, I'm actually optimistic that we're going to sort out the relationship with China. There's a lot of posturing all over the place at the moment. But at the end of the day, there is a mutual economic benefit to both countries in maintaining and developing the trading relationship. There's a mutual benefit in the people-to-people relationship. The Chinese community is the biggest non-Anglo-Saxon community in New South Wales, and has grown enormously. And the Chinese diaspora's contribution to this country has been absolutely huge. But we've also got to try and take a balanced view on these things. It was mentioned earlier about the negative media. And I think that's unfortunate, and I don't think we're going to solve the issues that need to be solved to get back to a good working relationship unless we are prepared to take a balanced view on things. There will be certain issues inevitably in any relationship, whether it's government to government or people to people, where there will be the potential for some irreconcilable differences. But for the many faults identified by the media sometimes in relation to China, I have to say that people need to remember that the economic success of China in the last 30, 40 years has actually seen 500 million people lifted out of poverty. It would be good if you could do that in Africa, for instance. So I'm positive. I think that this will come good, and I think the business community can make a big contribution to making that happen. So that's enough of the formal stuff. Now, there's an opportunity for people to ask questions, and I would welcome questions. Now, have we got any in the... There's no open questions. Oh, there must be a question.
Can I ask one, Jim?
Yes, you go ahead.
I'm quite interested in Murray's view on the sort of the hot sectors at the moment, or the hot new sectors in the China market.
Hot sectors. Well, I think when you look at trade stats, really there is only one hot sector, and it's processed food, beverages, horticulture, and health supplements. I mean, it's a broad category, but that is the bulk of what we export. I think that some of the other areas where there's opportunity are in medical devices. There's a few $100 million that we already export to China in the medical device space, and I feel that there's a lot of interest in actually Chinese investment in that. We are a country that's extremely innovative in Australia, but we don't have a big market, and we don't have a particularly aggressive venture capital industry compared with international markets. And I feel that there is a big interest in China in acquiring innovative technologies from Australia, under sort of licensing agreements or equity investments and so forth. And I think that's another area where we've been working quite diligently, I believe, to promote that. The other ones would be, I mean, obviously there's a huge amount of interest in the return of international students to New South Wales. China was our largest cohort of students, and there's still about 40,000 of them that have paid fees to be in Australia and are stuck here. So it's a matter of enormous importance to the New South Wales government that those kids can get back to Australia as soon as possible. And that's really, I'd say probably the most important thing that we want to see in the next couple of months is to find a pathway for those children. Now, we've already got an early stage, what we call a pilot program, which is going to be bringing students back from next month, but very small numbers. And we really want to see that scale up and be successful so that all those young students can get back. And, you know, Jim alluded to the fact that this is actually one of the most important areas of ballast in a relationship. While, you know, DFAT and the Chinese Foreign Ministry are disputing or arguing in the public domain and also behind the scenes. One of the things that actually keeps everything on an even keel is the fact that there's so many Chinese that have either studied in Australia, have children that studied in Australia, have got neighbours and friends that studied in Australia. It's actually really, really critically important to our bilateral relationship that those young people are able to get back to Australia as soon as possible. So I don't know, there's a bit of a grab bag of things there, Alison, but there is definitely there's still life in the relationship, and you know, there are still people that are working, as I say, quite diligently to keep things on an even keel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Murray. There's a couple of questions that come up. I think there's one there, Carla, for you regarding, you know, whether New South Wales has got any specific scheme which can assist on the high freight costs at the moment, the sea freight.
The federal government is running the International Freight Assistance Mechanism, which I'm not familiar whether that is sea. It's definitely air. I'm not sure whether it's sea as well. But there is certainly federal government support for challenges around supply chain and logistics. The New South Wales government is, of course, aware of the situation, and we're working with the federal government, but we don't have a specific program in place at this stage to defray those costs, other than the grants I spoke to you about before, which are a bit smaller or more localised in their support.
Thanks, Carla. Murray, can you see the question from Chris Proctor?
I did. So risks for the bifurcation of the tech space in China. Yeah, look, China's not a market for everybody, and I personally am very conservative about recommending that young startups come here. I don't think it's a market for the very, very, very early stage and inexperienced players. I think where the tech thing works well is where there are Chinese venture capital. This may also answer Matt Wakefield's question. There are some very professional, globally sophisticated, experienced operators in particular verticals around medical, so pharmaceuticals and medical devices, or clinical trials, different kinds of diagnostic therapies, who are looking for technology globally. And there's a lot of that to be had in Australia. And I find that where you can get those people to go down to Australia and purchase things or invest in things or sign up for technology licensing, technology transfer agreements, that works quite well. So yeah, there are definitely some classes of Australians that I would not recommend come to China at their current state of development. But for the ones that are a bit more mature, that have got good product, there is very real opportunities for them to raise capital under globally standard licensing agreements. And that's what we've tended to focus on, and we do. We've got links into a number of these groups in both Shanghai and in Guangzhou, and we look forward to actually running some pitching sessions. If people have products that they'd like to pitch that are on this call, please do reach out to us, because we have some opportunities to pitch in Guangzhou in early December. I've actually got a medical device and a medical technology pitching session coming up in probably, what's the date? November 30 in Guangzhou. So please reach out to me if you'd like to discuss that with me.
Sorry, I muted this one. Alison, one of the questions that's sometimes asked is, where does ACBC sit in the debate between, at government to government level, between Australia and China? Is ACBC taking a neutral posture or taking sides?
Thank you for that, Jim.
You're not thanking me very much, but it's a question that's asked.
Look, we're on the side of business. We're on the side of Australian business and Chinese business. So, and that's the focus of our organisation. Look, we understand that there's some very tricky issues in the bilateral relationship. We understand that the Australian government has to handle those. And I don't envy them having to handle those difficult issues. But what we do want the Australian government to recognise is the importance of the bilateral relationship, of the bilateral business relationship, I should say, of the extent to which Australian business do depend on this market for their livelihood in many cases. So as they address the complexity of the Australia-China relationship in all its facets, we want them to include really close understanding of the business relationship and its importance to Australia's economy and society. So to the extent that we engage on these issues, it's to really emphasise to government the need to take great notice of the business relationship in its handling of the overall bilateral relationship.
Thanks, Alison. I'm not sure, Murray, did you answer the question about medical device export?
Apologies, I don't see a question on medical device exports. Can you read it out to me, please?
It's in the chat. Also a question for Murray, our medical device export. By any chance, can you give us a breakdown of exporter SKUs and dollars?
Well, I don't want to go into the individual exporter names, but there's about, from memory, it was around about $200 million that's exported to China in the medical device category every year. And when I look at the HS codes, it refers to machines around diagnostic, analytical equipment, and respirators. So things to do with respiratory health, ventilators, that kind of thing. If there's someone in the audience that would like to discuss that with me, I'd be very happy to talk offline about that, Jim.
Thanks, Murray. I mean, one of the success stories in China in terms of medical devices has been the establishment of Cochlear, of its facilities in China, which has been very successful, but also very productive in exchanging skills and technology to help people with hearing disabilities. And Cochlear's got a very strong presence in China, including now a manufacturing facility. Also in the medical area, the George Institute, who are members of ACBC, have done tremendous work, particularly in Beijing, where they're involved in a whole range of activities. So there are certain areas where clearly there's a big need for Australian expertise. The other one too, incidentally, is training of staff and management expertise in areas like aged care. Opportunities for Australia and China in aged care aren't necessarily establishing an aged care facility in China, but there's certainly scope for skills exchanges and training, both in terms of carers and just in systems and procedures. So we dealt with all the questions there, Isabel. Is there any other questions?
Jim, it's been pointed out to me here, you mentioned the cherries. I can tell everybody that we're actually expecting the first shipment of Australian mainland cherries this week. And everybody's watching very, very closely to see how it goes through customs. Earlier in the year, there were several hundred containers of table grapes that came through, and it didn't go very well. They got through eventually, but their value was greatly reduced by the time they got through. And I don't think it was anything particularly picking on Australia. It was just the general care with which they're very worried about COVID getting in food. And so I think it was just the pace of things was very slow. So there was some disappointment around the entry of those grapes earlier in the year. The citrus crop came in basically without incident. All our various categories of oranges and lemons and limes and mandarins all got in without too much trouble, or any trouble really. That I was maybe a little bit of a delay, but nothing that spoiled the product. So everybody's watching very closely to see how the cherries go, but of course they don't have much shelf life. If they don't go through very quickly, they will spoil. So the horticulture trade is still going, and I look forward to updating people as to what happens with this first shipment of cherries. Fortunately, the first shipment was coming in at Victorians, so the New South Wales ones will be a week or so behind.
Yeah, just to give people an appreciation of the opportunity, the original launch of cherries by Minister Blair in China, they were cherries from the Young district in New South Wales. And the potential market in China, as some of the grower representatives said to me, is to take many-fold the total current production of cherries in the Young area. The Chinese market could take a volume, tens up to 100 times bigger than what's actually available. And the success of Australia since European settlement has been as an exporter. And that's really where we've earned our money. We've certainly become a more service-based economy in recent times, perhaps, but it is that exporting from when we exported the first 10 bales of Australian wool for commercial sale to London in 1809. Now, we've gone into iron ore and all sorts of things, but certainly if we look at the areas like the Riverina, the opportunities for their many diverse products in China are very significant. I think there's one new question. Oh,
there's
education, Murray.
About the education sector. Well, I think that people who are wanting to recruit students from China to come to Australia, obviously you can't get them in at the moment, but as I said, the New South Wales government has piloted a trial scheme to start getting the students back from this year, and I would hope that everybody hopes that the industry can start to recover in 2022. If there's further disruptions to travel, of course, that won't be possible, but we're looking optimistically. Let's say I think there's good prospect of that. The underlying demand for overseas study is very high, and Australia continues to be a popular destination, or it would be if our borders were open anyway. So I believe that if the international travel can be resolved, there'll definitely be underlying demand that will spring back, quite quickly. If the question from William is about investing or selling services in China, it really depends on what kind of education. Anything to do with preschool to year 12 is going to be difficult right now. The Chinese have, as I alluded to in my opening remarks, there's been some very dramatic policy changes affecting private tutoring, and really anything in that P to 12 stage of high schools is, I think, is going to be very, very difficult for anybody, let alone foreign providers. But if it's something to do with vocational education, there's a huge renaissance in vocational education and training at the moment, and enormous interest by the Chinese government in sort of repurposing universities away from bachelor's degrees into something more approaching a TAFE kind of thing that will give people the real practical skills. And they're doing a lot of work in the communications area to try to reset parents' expectations. There's Confucian values that, kids have to be white-collar workers is still deeply ingrained. But the government is interested in economic growth and productivity. And I think that if you've got a product in the vet sector, it's probably not a bad time to be looking at China, Jim. You're muted, Jim.
Jim, you're muted.
On mute.
Yeah, there we go. That was very unsuccessful.
My wife prefers the mute button, I think, with me, but
That's okay.
again,
I'd like to thank Murray,
Carla and Alison for their contribution today. Please take note of their contact details. There are tremendous resources available for people wanting to develop business links with China. We at Hunt & Hunt would be very pleased to assist anyone, as we've done over a number of years. And finally, I thank everybody who's registered for the program today. Details the slides and so on will be sent out to everybody. So I hope you have a great rest of a Wednesday. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.